Dear Radiant Leo, welcome to Eternal Mindfulness. If you're here, it's not by chance. Something deeper guided you to this very moment. Maybe it was a quiet whisper in your spirit, a strange heaviness in your heart, or the lingering question that no one seemed to answer. Either way, you're not here just to watch a video, you're here to uncover a truth your soul already knew. Let me ask you something that only your inner world can truly answer. Have you ever felt like something was happening behind your back but everyone told you it was just your imagination? Have you sensed a shift in someone close, a sister, perhaps a change in their energy, their words, or even their silence? Maybe you shook it off, told yourself not to overthink. But deep down, Leo, you felt it. Today, I'm going to tell you what no one else has had the courage to say. Your sister did something terrible behind your back. And someone in your family helped her. Not because you deserved it. Not because you did anything wrong. But because your light is powerful, and it triggered their shadows. You are not crazy. You are intuitive. You sensed it because you're deeply connected not just to people, but to truth, to energy, to the subtle shifts in the unseen. This betrayal, it's not a punishment. It's a divine awakening. You're not being pushed out, you're being lifted up. The universe is making space around you, removing what no longer aligns with your rising frequency. I know this is painful to hear. I know part of you still hopes it's all a mistake. But your soul brought you here to remember what you've always known. Not everyone is meant to walk the next chapter with you. Some relationships aren't meant to last, especially when they start hiding knives in their silence. If your chest feels tight, if your stomach has twisted, if your heart is aching but your mind is still doubting, stay. This message is for you. Not to hurt you. To free you. And as we go deeper into this sacred message, I want to take a moment from the bottom of my heart to thank you. For showing up. For choosing light. For being brave enough to face truth even when it trembles. Every like, every comment, every moment you spend here connects you deeper to the Eternal Mindfulness family. Your energy supports this space, and your presence is honored beyond words. So Leo, please stay with me until the very end, because what the universe is revealing today is nothing short of miraculous. And tell me, my loyal lions, what brought you here today? What have you felt recently that your mind couldn't explain but your heart never let go of? If you feel called, drop a comment below and simply say, I felt it too. That's your soul speaking. That's your confirmation. Now let's begin. And so, dear Leo, after recognizing that the ache in your chest was never irrational, that your unease was never imaginary, we arrive at a pivotal turning point where what once hurt you becomes what begins to free you. When betrayal enters from within the family, especially from someone as close as a sister, it shakes the very roots of your identity. But this shaking isn't destruction, it's a revelation. You are not being broken apart, you are being shown what is not truly aligned. Just as the earth must tremble before mountains realign, your inner world is simply adjusting to a truth you've long resisted seeing clearly. In astrology, Leo is ruled by the sun, the center, the core, the source of warmth and visibility. But what many forget is that even the sun casts shadows. And in the presence of your radiant light, others' unresolved darkness often stirs. When your natural confidence, your open heart, and your generosity shine too brightly, it can unearth discomfort in those who haven't yet made peace with their own insecurities. That discomfort can quietly morph into resentment. And when people don't know how to process their own suffering, they project it. Often subtly. Often in whispers. Often with help. But here's what matters more than what they did. It's what your spirit is being called to do now. You're not here to fix their actions or seek their repentance. You're here to notice where your energy has been leaking, where your peace has been bartered away in the name of loyalty, and choose to reclaim it. Just like a lion doesn't explain its roar, you do not owe anyone an apology for finally listening to the signals that have always been trying to protect you. This is where we practice the art of wise discernment, of seeing things as they are without turning them into a narrative of self-blame. You're not responsible for their behavior. You're responsible for your boundaries. Sometimes, the most compassionate thing we can do for others is to step away from the dynamic that enables their pain to keep repeating. And when that other is a family member, the practice becomes even more delicate. But detachment, when done with clarity and love, is not rejection. It's a higher form of respect, one that honors the space needed for healing to happen, without expectation or demand. There's a quiet truth passed down through the ages, that we must learn to let go, not with bitterness, but with understanding. When we stop trying to force resolution and instead choose to embody peace within ourselves, we loosen the karmic knots that bind us. It doesn't mean the past didn't happen. It doesn't mean their betrayal didn't cut deep. It simply means that you no longer allow it to dictate how you move forward. The wound may remain, but the suffering tied to it can be released when you stop rehearsing the pain and start honoring the lesson. And the lesson, Leo, is powerful. It's that you are not the roles others cast upon you. You are not the scapegoat, the overly emotional one, the one who took things too personally. You are the one who felt deeply because you cared deeply. You saw through the illusion because your insight is rooted in honesty, not in performance. And now, instead of shrinking to make others comfortable, you are being asked to rise gracefully, consciously, and without needing approval. The path of the lion is not loud vengeance. It is dignified detachment. It is the quiet power of seeing everything, saying little, and walking forward with strength that speaks louder than any explanation. You no longer have to carry what they did. You only need to carry what you've learned. And that, Leo, is more than enough. When you begin to realize that not every loss is truly a loss, something inside you begins to soften. You may still feel the sting of betrayal, especially when it comes from those you never imagined would cause harm, like your sister, or someone else in your family you trusted without question. But with that sting also comes a subtle shift, a quiet space where clarity can finally speak. This space is sacred. It's the moment when you stop asking, "Why did they do this to me?" and begin to explore, with compassion, "What is life trying to teach me through this?" That small change in perspective marks the beginning of your empowerment. Leo, you are ruled by the sun, constant, radiant, expressive. Yet no one talks about how exhausting it can be to always shine in a world that sometimes expects you to dim yourself for the comfort of others. When your light exposes what others have buried, it creates discomfort, and rather than turning inward to heal, some choose to blame the one who shines. This is not a reflection of your failure, but rather their inability to face their own darkness. What we resist in ourselves, we often attack in others. You may have been misunderstood, misjudged, even manipulated, but none of that ever defined your worth. There is something profoundly healing that happens when you stop resisting the truth and simply allow it to be what it is. The moment you let go of needing others to validate your pain, you step into a kind of freedom that no one can take from you. This is what it means to see clearly without needing to react. When you observe without attaching identity or blame, when you stop picking at the story and start tending to the wound, your energy begins to return to you. And it's in this returning that transformation begins, not dramatic, not loud, but slow and enduring, like the shifting of seasons. Cosmically, this period may reflect the influence of Saturn, the teacher, who shows up when it's time to face hard lessons with maturity. Saturn doesn't punish, it refines. And for Leo, whose fire is often forged through personal expression and loyalty, this lesson may arrive as a need to restructure your boundaries, not as a defense mechanism, but as a practice of inner discipline. To know where you end and others begin. To protect your emotional vitality without closing your heart. There is a simple but powerful truth: peace comes not from fixing the chaos outside, but from recognizing that clarity inside creates space for all things to settle. Just like still water reflects the moon perfectly, a calm mind allows truth to reveal itself. You do not need to force closure. You do not need to convince others of what really happened. The knowing that lives in your body is already enough. The ache in your gut was the first truth. The tightness in your chest was your inner compass. And now, instead of trying to prove your experience to those who won't listen, you can choose to move with wisdom, and let your next steps reflect your healing. In choosing not to respond with retaliation but with discernment, you reclaim your power. And in that silence, something extraordinary happens. You become unshakable. Not cold, not distant, but deeply rooted in who you are, no longer needing others to confirm your light. Your peace becomes the loudest statement. And Leo, your journey becomes not just about healing the wound, but about remembering who you were before it. You are still that brilliant, generous soul, only now, you're wiser, and your love has direction. There comes a moment, often quiet and almost unnoticeable, when you realize that what hurt you the most wasn't just a one-time event, it was a pattern. It was something deeper, older, more woven into the fabric of your family's history than you ever imagined. And suddenly, the betrayal you experienced doesn't just feel personal, it feels ancestral. Like you've been handed a weight that wasn't entirely yours to carry, yet here you are, the one who feels it, sees it, and cannot unsee it. That realization doesn't make the pain lighter, but it does make your presence more powerful. Because you're not just reacting to what happened, you're standing at the edge of a lineage, choosing a different direction. For Leo, whose essence is often tied to pride, loyalty, and legacy, it's not easy to admit that sometimes love hurts in familiar ways. Patterns of jealousy, competition, silence, and emotional distance may have been passed down not through intention, but through unconscious survival. These cycles don't announce themselves, they live in family dinners filled with tension, in unspoken comparisons between siblings, in gestures that look like care but carry weight. When one member begins to question it, begins to feel that something isn't right, that person becomes the mirror. And the mirror is rarely welcomed in a house full of unresolved stories. The number 6 in numerology connects to family, responsibility, and unconditional love. But it also represents the choice between harmony and guilt. Do you keep the peace by staying silent, or do you speak what is true and risk being misunderstood? Choosing to break a cycle doesn't mean breaking your family. It means breaking the silence. And when you're the one called to do that, it can feel isolating, like you're walking away from the people you were born to love. But in truth, you're walking away from a version of love that required self-abandonment to maintain. There's a lesson that speaks softly through quiet teachings, that the greatest act of compassion is often not clinging to the past, but allowing what no longer serves to fall away. When you recognize that pain has been handed down through generations not out of cruelty but unawareness, you begin to look at your own pain with softer eyes. It's not about blaming your sister or the family member who helped her. It's about choosing not to add your own bitterness to the chain. That is the moment healing begins, not just for you, but for everyone who came before you and everyone who will come after. This kind of healing isn't loud. It won't always look like confrontation or closure. It might simply be the quiet decision to no longer explain yourself in spaces that diminish you. To love from afar, without the need to fix. To set a boundary and hold it, not in anger, but in peace. That peace becomes your legacy. It's what turns you from the one who was hurt into the one who heals. And Leo, that's a transformation worthy of your fire. To support this energy, connect with what grounds you. Earth tones, like rich browns, and deeper purples, can remind you that while you are changing patterns, you are still rooted. Journal about what behaviors or beliefs you've seen repeated in your family line, then ask yourself, gently, do I want this to end with me? That question alone is powerful. You don't need a perfect answer. You just need the courage to not keep repeating what hurt you. Because healing a family doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes, it looks like one person, just one, choosing clarity over chaos, truth over tradition, and love without self-sacrifice. And Leo, if you're still listening, that person might just be you. When you begin noticing the silence where connection used to live, it's easy to interpret it as rejection. The calls stop coming. The inside jokes lose their charm. People you once felt tethered to begin slipping quietly out of your orbit. But what if this isn't abandonment at all? What if it's the universe realigning your surroundings to better match who you're becoming? What if the distance is not punishment, but protection? As your inner frequency begins to shift, often after a deep emotional rupture like betrayal, something subtle but profound begins to happen. The people, conversations, habits, and spaces that once made you feel comfortable begin to feel misaligned. You can't quite put your finger on it at first, but there's a sense of disconnection, like your energy no longer fits in rooms that once felt like home. This isn't because you've become difficult or broken. It's because you've outgrown an energetic pattern. What once resonated now feels heavy. What once felt like love may now feel like obligation. And that discomfort is sacred. It's signaling you that a change is underway. Leo, as someone who naturally leads with heart and loyalty, these shifts can feel especially confusing. You're not quick to walk away. You cherish bonds, defend them, sometimes to your own detriment. But now, instead of clinging tighter, you're being asked to loosen your grip. To let what wants to leave, leave. The Eight of Cups in the Tarot speaks directly to this journey, not as a fleeing, but as a conscious departure. It's the moment when you realize that continuing to pour yourself into what no longer pours back is an act of self-abandonment. This is not about casting others as villains. It's about recognizing where your energy is no longer being met with reciprocity or truth. And when you raise your frequency through healing, clarity, or simply choosing peace. Those still operating in lower vibrations naturally drift. It's not cruel. It's law. Just as a river doesn't beg a rock to move, it flows around it. You're not losing people. You're making space. The right connections will never require you to betray yourself to keep them. Still, the transition can feel lonely. You may find yourself in a space of in-between, no longer resonating with the past, not yet anchored in the new. This space is often mistaken for emptiness, but in truth, it's fertile. It's a pause that invites intention. Rather than rushing to fill the void, allow yourself to sit in it. Let it show you what you truly value, what you truly need, and what you're truly ready to release. This is where discernment sharpens, not through analysis, but through stillness. From a broader lens, this experience mirrors a simple yet profound teaching, that all things are impermanent, and clinging to what has expired only invites unnecessary suffering. When we stop resisting change, we stop interrupting our own expansion. Growth isn't always loud or triumphant. Sometimes it looks like cleaning out a closet, deleting old messages, or writing an unsent letter that closes a chapter for good. These small, deliberate acts are not meaningless theory rituals of letting go. And they signal to the universe that you're serious about aligning with what nourishes your spirit. You might begin to notice new invitations, subtle ones. A class that interests you. A conversation that feels light. A person who listens with presence instead of performance. Follow those trails. Let them lead you to the people and spaces that match the frequency you now embody. You are not here to convince anyone to stay. You are here to honor what's real. And in doing so, the next chapter will find its way to you, not through effort, but through alignment. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as a return to closeness, a reopening of the door that once led to hurt. But true forgiveness doesn't always mean reconnection, it means release. It means untangling your energy from what wounded you, not out of spite, but out of respect for your healing. Forgiveness, in its highest form, is not an invitation to resume the relationship, but a quiet declaration that you're no longer willing to carry the weight of the past within your body. And Leo, with your deep heart and instinct to protect, this may be one of the most challenging lessons to accept. As Saturn moves in retrograde, it brings forward themes that you can no longer avoid: emotional boundaries, self-respect, and the often blurred line between compassion and self-sacrifice. This planetary movement doesn't ask you to become hard or guarded. It invites you to examine what you allow, and more importantly, why. Are you responding from guilt? Habit? The hope that someone will change? Or are you honoring what your inner wisdom already knows? The Justice card in the tarot reminds us that real balance often comes through choice, not chance. It teaches that fairness isn't about pleasing everyone, it's about aligning your actions with truth. And sometimes, that truth is simple yet powerful. Just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you owe them access to your space, your energy, or your heart. The act of forgiving is internal, it's about reclaiming your power from the grip of resentment. But the decision to reconnect? That's external, and it must be earned, not assumed. When you separate the act of forgiveness from the expectation of reunion, you open the door to deeper peace. You're no longer clinging to the hope that the other person will change or make it right. You no longer need their apology to validate your pain. You recognize that your healing doesn't depend on their awareness, it depends on your willingness to release yourself from the story. And that is a quiet kind of freedom, one that grows stronger every time you choose not to re-enter a dynamic that made you feel small, unseen, or unsafe. Writing a forgiveness letter that you never send is a powerful way to process this release. Let the words flow not for them, but for you. Let your truth spill out, not as a demand, but as a form of emotional alchemy. Name what happened, name how it felt, and then write what you choose now. This exercise is not about closure through contact. It's about closure through clarity. You are allowed to set boundaries that protect your peace. You are allowed to walk away, even if others don't understand. Especially if they don't understand. In quiet teachings passed down through ages, there's a simple reminder that loving yourself sometimes requires choosing distance over loyalty. Not all connections are meant to be restored. Some were only ever meant to show you where you had abandoned yourself, so you could return home to who you really are. This isn't bitterness, it's discernment. You're not shutting anyone out. You're closing the chapter that no longer matches the person you're becoming. Repeat to yourself, gently but firmly, I forgive you, but I do not forget. I respect myself enough not to return to the place that once fractured me. This isn't coldness, it's care. The lion does not roar at every passerby. It watches, it listens, it protects what matters. And now, Leo, that means protecting your growth, your peace, and your future. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. And walking away may be the most loving act you've ever committed, not against them, but for you. And now, dear Leo, we arrive at the soft landing of this journey, not a conclusion, but a quiet doorway to something entirely new. After the shedding, the truth-telling, and the brave decisions to let go, something within you feels different. Lighter. Quieter. Stronger. The silence that once felt like emptiness now begins to feel like possibility. The space that once echoed with absence is now fertile ground for something beautiful to emerge. This is where you meet yourself, no longer shaped by the versions others projected onto you, but as the soul you've always been, intact, aware, and more radiant than ever. If you felt isolated lately, if certain relationships fell away without dramatic endings, know this: it wasn't a punishment. It was preparation. The universe, in its quiet wisdom, has been clearing the path for your soul tribe, the people who will sit with your silence and still understand you, who won't flinch at your truth, who will celebrate your wins without jealousy and hold your heart without condition. You haven't been forgotten. You've been recalibrated for authenticity. And that's why, now more than ever, what comes next will feel like alignment rather than effort. The energy of the star in tarot whispers this truth to you: you are in the healing waters of renewal. You've walked through fire, yes. But you didn't become ashes. You became clearer. More intentional. And now, what seeks you is also what sees you. Whether it's a soul connection, a love that feels safe and expansive, or a career opportunity that finally honors your worth, it's all approaching not because you chased it, but because you made room for it. You no longer vibrate from need. You now attract from wholeness. So pause here for a moment. Let yourself absorb this. Breathe into the knowing that your journey wasn't about loss, it was about refinement. Ask yourself, gently, what have I released that was never really mine to carry? What qualities have I discovered about myself through this transformation? And most importantly, what kind of love, what kind of community, what kind of life am I now ready to receive? Let these questions stay with you. Let them guide your reflections. And if something in this message cracked something open in you, if a single sentence felt like it was written just for you, I want to invite you to share. What part of this journey moved you the most? What truth finally felt safe enough to rise to the surface? Drop it in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to feel less alone. And if you're ready, say it out loud in writing. I'm ready to receive my soul-aligned life. Your presence here means more than you know. And I want to take a moment, sincerely, to thank you. For your energy. For your trust. For spending this sacred time with me. Every like, every share, every thoughtful comment is a heartbeat that connects you deeper to the Eternal Mindfulness family. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support not only sustains this channel, it keeps its spirit alive. It allows these messages to reach those who need them most, just as it found you today. So, if you found value in what we shared, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss future guidance crafted with deep care. This isn't just a channel, it's a gathering place for souls who are healing, growing, and becoming. And Leo, you are a light within that circle. You haven't lost anything. You've found yourself again. And now everything else will rise to meet you.